Welcome to another episode of Mike's Little Dudes, an exploration of some aspects of toy soldiering. So, what's the difference between a toy soldier and a military miniature? Well, there may not be a clear answer to this question, because in many cases the categories overlap, but in general, toy soldiers are made of rubber or plastic or cheap metal. Toy soldiers are often unpainted, and they can take a lot of abuse. In my collection, I have Marx figures that I received as a child that are still in perfect condition, whereas many of the metal figures I received for Christmas and birthdays became casualties long ago. Military miniatures are more upscale. They're usually more carefully sculpted and usually more detailed than toy soldiers, and they tend to be more historically accurate in terms of uniforms and weapons. Most are made of metal and come painted, although some are sold as castings and kits that need to be assembled, because a lot of the collectors like to paint their own figures. Now let's look at some examples. This is a metal casting, and this is the same figure which I have painted, and I think I did a fairly good job on this, if I do say so myself. Perhaps the main difference between toy soldiers and military miniatures is that toy soldiers have play value and military miniatures have display value. So for example, one of the best figures I have is this warrior. He is finely painted, magnificently sculptured, but I wouldn't play with him. For one thing, the spear point can go right through my finger, and you wouldn't want a child playing with this. For another thing, he's very expensive. So this goes on the shelf to display, but many of these others I play with. Toy soldiers and military miniatures come in various sizes and scales. About the smallest is a 1-inch figure. This is 1/72 scale, and these are used largely by war gamers because they can fit a lot of soldiers on the tabletop as they conduct their war games. This is about a 2-inch figure, which is 45 to 48 millimeters, 1/40th scale. Same with the Indian. And now we're getting to a little bit bigger scale. This is 54 millimeter or 1/32. Likewise with this Britain's figure. Now we're getting to the range of about 2¼ inches and up from that, and that would be in the range of 60 millimeters. This is one of my favorite guys, a frontiersman I painted. He's about 2½ inches. And then this Rogers Rangers figure from John Jenkins' design. And now another frontiersman, which I haven't gotten around to painting yet. He's a little taller, but if you actually start him at his foot, it's not quite so bad. Now we've advanced to a bigger scale. This is about 1/20th scale or 90 millimeters. You can see that I'm in the process of painting him, and he will have arms later on. And then you're really getting into toy areas where you're talking about figures that are 5½ to 6 inches tall. The problem comes when you're trying to create a scene with different figures from different manufacturers. So for example, these two figures come from different manufacturers. This is a Britain's figure and this is a John Jenkins design. And you can see that while they're both around the French and Indian War, American Revolution period, they really don't go together very well. Earlier I mentioned about improvement in manufacturing techniques, and here's a good example. These two figures are from my Marx Fort Apache playset. This figure, made back in the 1990s by Conti Collectibles, is an Alamo Defender. And what I want to point out is this. If you look at these two guys, similar poses, both are kneeling and firing. But if you look at the guns, you can see on this one a much more detailed firing mechanism. You can see the hammer and the frizzen. This one is nondescript. There's no actual firing mechanism on that rifle. If you look even a little further, you can see on this guy you have the powder horn, and it's just kind of sitting there. This guy's powder horn has straps attached to it. So that way you can see how the powder horn is sitting there. That's what I mean by detail. I mentioned that one of the differences between toy soldiers and military miniatures tended to be the accuracy of military miniatures in terms of weapons and uniforms. So what we're looking at here is a set of soldiers produced by a company called First Legion. And these soldiers represent the British 1st Regiment of Foot, which fought at the battles of Lexington and Concord, which started the American Revolution. This group represents a grenadier company, and the way to distinguish one regiment from another would be by the uniforms. So for example, the collars on the uniforms, the cuffs on the uniforms, and the strips down the jacket would be different colors depending on the regiment that it represented. So this is a fairly accurate representation of what the uniforms from this particular regiment would look like. These figures represent the Americans who fought that British unit at the battles of Lexington and Concord. And you'll notice they are not in uniform, and that's because the American Army hadn't been formed yet. These were simply colonists. Some of them were farmers, some of them were shop tenders. All of them were British citizens at this time. And so the clothes they're wearing are, again, an accurate representation of colonial dress.